technical hocus pocus to get you to see the movie? Or the background to stories that teach us about life? Hi, I'm Judy Fichera, and welcome back to the Chronic Rift. Tonight we're going to explore the world of special effects. Those effects that make things look a little different or weird. But then again, some things were not meant to be changed. The Sci-Fi Channel has now added Doctor Who to its collection. They picked up 114 of the episodes and are planning to pick up the 450 remaining episodes. Don't worry, fans, you can still see the show on most public broadcast shows. They have also picked up 500 hours of science fiction classics, including the works of Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi, and none other than Boris Karloff. The channel will premiere at the end of this year. Last week we announced the Roundtable Awards. Remember those? We said, what the hell are they? Well, periodically we'll be announcing the categories again for those of you who have forgotten what they are or are too cheap to write in for the list. The categories are Best Performer in a TV Series or Movie, Best Writer in a TV Series, Movie, Novel, or Comic Book, Best Director in a TV Series or Movie, Best Special Effects in a TV Series or Movie. We're only giving you the first 4. You have to tune in next week to get the rest. We'd also like to announce that we're looking for 3 good science fiction fans, because in April we are going to seek out and find the best fan of science fiction fantasy in New York. If you think you are he or she, please send us your name, address, phone number, shoe size, and a few other interesting details to us here at The Rift. The staff watched the premiere of The Next Generation a few weeks ago, and generally speaking the consensus was good, save for our director Paula. She was very much disappointed in it. Keith was, how should I say, happy with the way things turned out. John couldn't predict the ending, and he liked that, but then he found that the ending was a bit rushed. And me, what is with the Hamlet references? Sleep, sleep. What's the matter, Stuart? You can't get any more work for the RSC? Really? Our book note is the paperback magazine of science fiction and speculative fact, New Destinies, edited by Jim Bain. Bain Books is covering it for $3.50 and will include such authors as Elizabeth Moon, John Dalmas, and Powell Anderson. The current edition is on sale now, so go out and get it. This week's memorable moment comes from our very own Keith DeCandido. He's been moaning and groaning and complaining ever since we started the memorable moment that he wanted his scene on. So, here it is, and remember, if you want to write in and give us one, by all means, do so.
King, then. The Lady of the Lake, her arm clad in the purest shimmering samite, held aloft Excalibur from the bosom of the water, signifying by divine providence that I, Arthur, was to carry Excalibur. That is why I'm your king.
Listen, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical aquatic ceremony. Be quiet. Oh, but you can't expect to wield supreme executive power just because some watery tart threw a sword at you. Shut up! I mean, if I went round saying I was an emperor, just because some moistened bint had lobbed a scimitar at me, they'd put me away. Shut up! Will you shut up? Ah, now we see the violence inherent in the system. Shut up! Oh, come and see the violence inherent in the system! Help! Help! I'm being repressed! Bloody peasant! Oh, what a giveaway. Did you hear that? Did you hear that, eh? That's what I'm on about. Did you see him repressing me? You saw it, didn't you?
Nice head, Keith. I hope your news is better than that.
I beg your pardon.
Beg all you want.
Well, anyway, that scene, for those of you who didn't figure it out, is from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, one of the 3 funniest movies ever made after This Is Spinal Tap and Duck Soup. Anybody who disagrees with this assessment is, quite frankly, wrong. Anyway, I have no news this week. Whether that's good news or not remains to be seen, but I'm going to break with tradition and jump straight into this week's comic in review, which is the DC Comics version of Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek has had a long and tumultuous history in the comics. In the 1970s, Gold Key published a comic to ride the wave of Trek hysteria that was going round while the show went into reruns. The book gave new meaning to the word putrescent. The stories were grade Z science fiction twaddle that would have been rejected by the Buck Rogers TV show. My favorite was when Spock solved the problem by researching old Vulcan voodoo techniques. The characterizations were horrendous. The art was miserable. The interior of the Enterprise resembled the interior of the Enterprise from the TV show about as much as the studio does. Gold Key's book died a merciful death in the late 70s. And with 1979's release of Star Trek the Motion Picture, Marvel Comics gained the comic rights. Marvel adapted the movie and then did a monthly comic that had an 18-issue run. It was 18 issues too long. It was better than Gold Key. It was actually visually recognizable as Star Trek, but the stories were still very, very silly. I will never forget the haunted house in space story. They couldn't keep a creative team for more than about 3 seconds, and none of them were any good. After 1982's Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan was a proven success, DC Comics was given a shot at doing Star Trek. Although it was somewhat uneven, this was by far superior to either of its predecessors. The characters were well done, plus some very interesting supporting characters were added. The stories were interesting, if occasionally slow-moving, but for the first time, you felt like you were actually seeing Star Trek. DC's book had a number of writers. The first was Mike W. Barr, who had a good handle on the characters and put in some nice touches that related to the Star Trek universe. There was a year's worth of fill-ins after Barr left, which ranged from absolutely fantastic to Gold Key level crap. The low point was when Len Wein took over the series. Len Wein is one of the worst writers in the entire comics field, and his Star Trek is even worse than his usual. Mike Carlin took over after Wein, and he was adequate. His best was the sequel to the very bad episode The Apple, which dealt very intelligently with that episode's numerous problems. However, the book hit its stride when Peter David took over for Carlin. David does the characters better than anyone. He has a very good sense of humor, good sense of story and pace, and is excellent at carrying subplots. He finally resolved about 16 subplots that the previous writers had left hanging for 40 issues. The only flaw with the series are the 2 regular artists, Tom Sutton and Ricardo Villagrán, who were weak from the beginning and degenerated as the series progressed. They only had about 4 faces in their repertoire between them, and they had a Gold Key understanding of the interior of the Enterprise. Around the beginning of Star Trek The Next Generation's first season, DC did a 6-issue Star Trek The Next Generation comic book, which unsurprisingly was pretty bad. Writer Mike Carlin had absolutely nothing to work with. The show had just started production. At best, he could have seen maybe 3 episodes of the show. DC was just cashing in on the Trek craze. Then, with the 54th issue, Paramount pulled the rug out from Star Trek with no explanation given. After last year's Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, the comic rights were reinstated, and DC put out monthly comics featuring both Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek is written by Peter David, drawn by Jim Fry, who has since been replaced by Gordon Purcell, and Arnie Starr. The Next Generation is written by Michael Jan Friedman and drawn by Pablo Marcos. David's work continues to be excellent and enjoyable, especially now that he has talented artists who know what the people and the things look like working with him. Anyone familiar with Friedman's Trek novels, among them Double Double and Doomsday World, should know what to expect from his Trek comic books. Garbage. Anyone familiar? There are stories that might have worked in the weaker Flash Gordon strips, or again on the old Buck Rogers TV show. Friedman's idea of characterization is based on trivial facts about characters, rather than silly little things like motivation. For example, having Picard quote Nietzsche because Picard knows things like that, even though the Nietzsche quote is totally inappropriate to the story. Or my personal favorite, having Picard say, "Sacre bleu," because he's French, and French people talk like that. Friedman's idea of plot is to throw together the hoariest SF cliches he can find and solve them in the most incomprehensible, unsatisfying, and unlikely manner. Marcos' art is getting better, but it's still pretty poor. He always draws people in the most uncomfortable positions possible. On the screen, Star Trek is old and tired, where The Next Generation is vital and interesting. With the comics, it's the exact opposite. As long as Peter David is writing it, I heartily recommend Star Trek, but until Michael Jan Friedman goes far, far away, never to return, I urge you to keep away from Star Trek The Next Generation. Both books are available monthly published by DC Comics, 22 pages an issue, $1.25 an issue, and are available both at comic shops and some newsstands. One last thing I'd like to throw in before I finish with Comic Art Commentary this week. I just found out today that Jerry Iger died September 11th. Jerry Iger worked with Will Eisner on the Eisner and Iger studios in the early 30s, and that studio produced a number of the great comic artists, among them Jack Kirby. Rest in peace, Jerry. Anyway, yes?
What's the old meaning of putrescent?
Well, the old meaning of putrescent is something that is bad. It is awful. It stinks. It's rotten. It's icky. It smells bad. It's awful. It's horrible. The new definition is the Gold Key Star Trek. Okay?
Slightly.
Okay. Where Where does our fascination with the fantastic begin?
I don't know.
Well, I'm going to tell you. Well, maybe I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to hint at it anyway. In the past, we've discussed the rising popularity of fantasy and science fiction films and TV shows. What is it about them that sparks our imagination? Are we entranced by the story of a young boy and his extraterrestrial friend? Or do we just gape at the glowing finger that the alien extends from time to time? Do we care about the banding together of a group of freedom fighters to battle the forces of evil? Or do we just marvel at the large Death Star waiting to blow our heroes out of the sky? Is our interest held by watching a group of people we've come to know very well over 3 seasons struggle against a nigh unbeatable foe? Or do we just groove on the neat makeup on the Borg and the cool space battles? What is the effect of special effects? Here's some clips to sort of give you an idea of what the answer is.
Mr. Scott,
Scotty here, sir.
please tell me the transporter is working.
She's got partial power, sir. I might be able to take 2 of you.
Beam up Spock from Dr. McCoy. Now.
Now, just a minute. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Bring up the captain. All right.
Hello. I'm Peter. Where are you from? Originally. All right, okay. The usual stuff isn't working. Okay, I have a plan. I know exactly what to do. Now stay close. Stay close. I know. Do exactly as I say. Get ready. Ready? Get her!
Let that take! Nothing with you, baby Herman. You were great. You were perfect. You were better than perfect.
I don't think you realize what you're dealing with here.
Doctor, I assure you these men are hand-picked. They can deal with anything, provided they can see it. Right, men, take up positions.
Take his arms, move him back to the truck.
With Judy and I to discuss this very effective topic are Michael Fichera, artist by trade and who last appeared on our show discussing cover art. He's on my left. Over on my right is, well, Judy. And Ken Walker, head of Walker Works, an animatronics firm that has done extensive work in the special effects field. And next to him is Peter Wallach, head of the appropriately named Peter Wallach Enterprises, the company responsible for the effects on Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, among many others. Mike, speaking as someone who watches science fiction movies and fantasy movies, and how important do you think the special effects are to the appreciation of something?
Well, Keith, let me just start by saying I don't think the exclusion of special effects will necessarily ruin a science fiction movie, but the inclusion of a special effect is definitely a plus, so long as it's believable. I know many films where a poor special effect becomes almost the subject of bad comedy.
Can you think of any examples?
Well, from my own personal opinion, Doctor Who sometimes is bad comedy for me. I watched the show looking at some pretty cheap special effects and looking at trash cans moving around, which they call the Daleks. And I find it funny, where many other people take it very seriously. But if I think of the poorer the special effect, the less believable and the less you can get into the movie itself.
How, since you two have worked, you guys are coming at it from the other side, how, I mean, this may be a tough question for you to answer, but how exactly, either one of you can feel free to jump in on this, how important do you think they are?
Well, I would say that if the check clears, it's very important. If the check doesn't clear, you spend most of your time arguing with LA, which is 3 hours behind the rest of civilization.
In more ways than one.
Yeah.
I think they are important to films today. People are so visually oriented now that you just can't present a fantasy film without going full-blown, spending millions and millions of dollars on it. Just anything less just doesn't work. Just like you're talking about Doctor Who. I happen to like the series. I think it's fun. But you could never get away with that in a film.
Well, what about The Princess Bride? That didn't really, I mean, that was all real people.
Well, effects can be simple if it's born out of the story, and the story dictates that the effects can be quite simple. I mean, a lot of Princess Bride was done as glass paintings. And, you know, you can take a piece of glass and paint on it and make something, you know, the illusion very believable. Effects don't have to be complicated to really seem special. They can be sometimes very simple, and yet they add something to the story. But they should always be part of the story and not just thrown in just superfluously.
I think it's a matter of keeping up with the state of the art. For example, looking at Wizard of Oz back then, the background scenery was paintings, not necessarily matte paintings, but they were good paintings for the movie, and it worked well. Nowadays, I don't know if they can get away with that. They may seem a little chintzy for the budget.
Well, they just did it in Dick Tracy, you know? I mean, it's paying homage to the past and what you learn from the past. I mean, some of the techniques that George Méliès did in his studio, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
What kind of stuff did he do?
He did the film Man on the Moon. He's the very first special effects artist there was. And before there was a zoom lens, what he used to do is the camera never moved. The actor would move. So the actor would be put on a stage and pulled towards the camera. And almost all special effects done in films today can be traced back to George Méliès. And color films, he did color films. He would hire these women to like cut out these tiny little paper masks that were put on these black and white films and hand tinted. But he would have 8 to 10 release prints that were all hand tinted. And his films were seen by the public in color. And when you see old movies and you think of them as being sped up or, you know, jerky, the projectionists would hand crank the projectors at the same speed that the film was shot at, which made them move much slower. So only because we show things at 24 frames a second do early films look sped up, but the public seeing them at the time saw them in those ways.
Is that why? That's something I've always wondered.
So we can't even appreciate the effects that they created.
No, if you were to hand crank or transfer the film slower, which they often do, they'll make a video transfer of the film slower, and then the pacing seems quite normal. But, you know, there is a degree of sophistication where the level of sophistication goes up, but there's also sort of an homage to what has happened in the past where you want to, you know, learn. There's a charm that The Wizard of Oz has that's missing from a lot of films today, you know.
What do you think of something like Star Trek the Motion Picture, which was all special effects and or Battlestar Galactica, to give another example, where everything was sunk into the special effects, and it was very obvious that nobody gave much thought to silly little things like story and acting and directing and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me it was, my friend Bran Farron was the one who went out to California and got the job and subcontracted all the models to us. So we were very happy, and Ken worked with me on that. We were very happy to get the Enterprise and the Bird of Prey and everything, you know, together in one room. Star Trek to me was always sort of grown men in pajamas, and I could never quite understand why in this sophisticated spaceship, whenever they would get hit by the Bird of Prey or bumped, that they'd fall out of their seats. Wouldn't they have seatbelts?
Or more likely, I mean, if that was really true, then what would happen is every time they accelerated to warp 9, which is very much past the speed of light, they would all get smeared against the back of the bridge.
But they don't.
Yeah. Well, but I think you're right. I mean, the problem with to me in Star Trek V is that that the story wasn't really there, and then all the piling on of the special effects was like putting icing on cake. But the cake is bad, you know.
I was thinking of the first Star Trek movie, Star Trek Motion Picture.
That was pretty embarrassing. That was pretty. Yeah, that was very embarrassing.
At the time, though, it came along when Star Wars was out and popular.
2 years after. Yeah.
and everybody wanted to jump on the bandwagon of special effects. Battlestar Galactica was extremely like that. They got the same studio, they got everything. They wanted to duplicate that. Oh yeah, they tried to duplicate the entire success.
But there was a story to Star Wars that...
Oh, exactly. They thought they could duplicate it with flashy special effects. I mean, they were flashy at the time. They were nice.
Yeah.
But,
it looked good, but...
It still looked nice, really.
Yeah, but you don't. It just doesn't take the place of it. You can't substitute one for the other. They've got to, just like Star Wars, they have to blend together.
Battlestar Galactica was very attractive at the time. It was the first TV show to really be using that kind of level of special effects, and it caught most of my friends' attention back in grammar school. But after a while,
How long did it hold your attention, though?
It wore thin, definitely. That was the problem.
Let's see, how many times you can make the card do this? You can work with something called animatronics. For the uninitiated, what is animatronics exactly?
Well, the term itself was born at Walt Disney Studios in the late 50s. When their engineers started building these robotic characters that they wanted to put into their theme parks, they wanted a flashy name to go with it. So they thought of audio animatronics, and what it means is animation operated with electronics that's tied into a music soundtrack. So it all came together in the term audio animatronics. Well, during the last 10 years, present special effects practitioners have decided to appropriate the term for their own use. And what it covers a host of things now. What it means is cable-controlled creatures. It means, what else? Electronic-controlled things, radio control, that's another one. What it means really is all the things that go inside of a creature or behind the scenes operating some moving facsimile of a moving creature. So it's all-encompassing, sort of like that now.
What kind of things have you done?
Oh, well, I worked on Black Rain is a good example. There's a sequence in the film when one of the stars is decapitated on camera. It's a very high point in the film, and obviously you can't get an actor to sit there and say, well, okay, put your neck up here. And
you can get the actor's agent.
That's not in my contract.
So they have somebody build a fully working dummy of the actor that looks just like him, and we built one that actually moved all over the place, although you don't see it in the film. They just used several frames of the head popping off, but it was actually there on set where a motorcycle rider rode by with a real sword and chopped right through the dummy's head, and it's flailing all around, blood's flying out. And the actor's sitting back smoking a cigarette saying, wow, that's pretty neat.
You mentioned earlier, we were talking before, you worked on Transformers?
Oh, it's a Peter Wallach project. I did I did something for it. It's a giant mechanical robot hand about 10 feet long that curled its fingers and held up a little child in its hand.
Well, what I should mention there is that we were supposed to shoot 30 openings and closings for this show. And
this is for the cartoon show?
Cartoon show for Transformers. And we started to look at it, and I knew that in the past, the way we would do it is we would shoot a kid against blue screen, and we'd have a stop-motion model, and we'd have the stop-motion model and have to mat the kid going into the hand, and then we'd have background plates that we'd have to mat in. When I started to decipher the storyboard and really look at it, it was as many as 2 to 3 blue screen shots and very complicated special effects to put it all together. So what I decided to do was, I said to my people, what if we had a robot head that was 12 feet high and shoulders that were 38 feet long, and instead of having a little 8x10 background, we painted a sky that was 60 feet long and had a giant hand like the King Kong hand built, which Ken built for us. Wouldn't it be great to just do it all live? And they all looked at me like, and that's exactly what we did, and it proved to be cost effective. It was much more expensive to build it initially, but upon shooting it, you know, the post-production houses that were used to making fortunes off us were left without any, you know, real money to be had because it was all in camera.
If you had done it the first way, how many man-hours, or person-hours, I should say, would it have taken?
Probably a lot more, ultimately. You know, I don't know exactly. We don't break it down in terms of hours, and we just, you know, we just say, well, how many days without sleep can we do? Which sort of what Star Trek was like, you know, a marathon of, oh, you think you pulled an all-nighter? Well.
But I think it was more fun having all this stuff live on stage. We all got there. We were all working in our own shops, putting all this stuff together. It's all coordinated on set when we get it over to a studio in Astoria, is that where it was? And all of a sudden you have this giant color backing, this huge robot head, a hand, and it's magical. It really is magical. It's something that transcends doing it in miniature. It's something else entirely.
It's more than meets the eye, huh?
Yes, or in this case, more than meets the hand. Is that, you mentioned that, you know, you spend a lot of time on this, and something I've noticed seeing from the layperson's perspective, seeing specials on it, which is about the only connection they would get. Like recently, there was a segment on Primetime Live on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they mentioned this one bit where they were showing the Enterprise orbiting Earth with this spider-like thing on it that was dry dock, was supposed to be fixing it. And then it took them hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and days and years and centuries to put this thing together for a 14-second shot.
That happens.
Is that how?
Well, in those cases, I don't think that's true. They through the magic of digital effects processing after the fact on videotape, they can combine still pictures, they can combine anything and make it look like something took a long time to make. It could be a painting.
But, I mean, is that... Well, they went through the whole process.
Well, there are experiences where you do that, and hopefully what you get, I think the most memorable one that they've covered the most, that I've seen the most, is in the second Star Wars, when you had the 30 ships going and tumbling and all these incredible mats going at once. And it took tremendous man-hours. The thing is, the payoff is that moment of realization where you sit in a theater and you see it and are dazzled and excited by it, you multiply that by the number of people seeing it for 3 seconds, and it sort of is a payoff for all the work that went into it. I know that I can look at something we did, and if it's near perfect, if we did it near perfect, I can look at it again and again. If it's not, I'm cringing, you know, hiding under the seats.
What do you think? This is once again we're going into the dumb question aspect.
But you're good at them.
Yes, that's true. Just to sort of get an idea, what do you think is an example, and why, of a really effective bit of special effects? And
in a 300-word essay.
Yeah.
Outlined.
In any movie, my example very effective.
Something you think works, and then.
Just thinking, just from the last movie I just saw with Total Recall, there were one of the best special effects I've seen in a long time was just running through the X-ray machine and watching the computer synchronization of a man running with the skeleton outline, and the perfect synchronicity of his movements with the computer's movements, and the whole lifelike aspect when everything was done completely on computers. And even that was maybe 18 seconds of film, but being in the audience and watching everyone in the audience, everyone was just stuck there amazed at this special effect and thinking of the possibility of that actually occurring and actually existing in real life. It struck the audience, and people talked about it afterwards, and that really made the special effect.
What do you, all right, I'll nail you this time. What do you think is a really pathetic example? A putrescent example, to use the word we're fond of tonight. The word of the evening tonight.
Of a special effect.
Yeah. You can't think of one.
I can.
What?
When I watched, God, what was that show?
Doctor Who.
No, I like that show. And you can't tell me the effects are bad. Oh my God, I can't tell you because we've got to wrap it up.
Fully.
Ha! Saved by the bell.
Oh well.
Gentlemen, thank you ever so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
You too.
It was a pleasure. Until next week when we discuss the horror of horror, time is an illusion.
Lunchtime, doubly so.
Good night.
Bye.